Hello and welcome back. We've got a very practical discussion on tap for today, and it's entitled The Answer. We'll go through what the question is, and we'll also talk about what the answer is. But this is going to be a conversation that talks a lot about some of the basics, some of the foundations of spiritual practice. And this is universal. It's true whether you are an adherent to one of the world's traditional religions or whether you're not, or whatever other form of spirituality you practice. This is something that applies to each and every one of us. It's universal as spirituality is universal. It applies to everyone, and it still applies, even though there are people in this world that think this is all complete nonsense. And that's putting it mildly. I thought of about 10 other words instead of nonsense. They think it's all bunk, a bunch of crap. There are people out there that think that way, and this still applies to them. They can certainly choose to run and hide and deny that all of this has any importance whatsoever. That is their choice. Perhaps you have friends and family members that are in this category. I certainly do. I most certainly do. It's not uncommon. See, it's their choice here in time, in this lifetime. They can choose to run and hide, as can you, but you haven't, right? Or if you have in the past, you're not doing it now because you're watching this video, which should prove to you that you're not hiding. And for that, I thank you. And everyone thanks you, by the way, because everyone is involved in this, including those who choose to run and hide. They're one with us. We're not superior to them, we're one. They're not superior to us, we're one. No one is superior nor inferior to anyone else. Why? There is no one else. One. Therefore, what we're talking about here is completely 100% universal. The Holy Spirit here in A Course in Miracles goes by many names. We see very often the voice for God as a way of looking at the Holy Spirit as a name for it. We also see the universal inspiration, friend with a capital F, and others. And today we're looking at one of those monikers, the answer. Yeah, capital A, the answer. The Holy Spirit is the answer. Always the answer to whatever question the ego may raise, and it raises quite a few, doesn't it? The answer is the Holy Spirit. The answer is the inner teacher, your inner teacher. That is the answer. Your inner teacher speaks truly. Hence the emphasis, the heavy practical emphasis on your relationship with your inner teacher, whatever you call it. Very, very critically important. This is the voice for God, the voice that speaks of God, for God, that directs you if you allow it. The answer. So what's the question? Well, it's asked by the ego, of course, because we see here in this next section of the text. So it's chapter 6, section 4, the only answer. Not only is the Holy Spirit the answer, he's the only answer. right? That's the title of this section. And in the first few paragraphs here, we see that the ego always speaks first. It babbles. The Holy Spirit is the answer, and the ego always speaks first. Like a giant chatterbox, it will not shut up. Such is its heavy duty anxiety that it's always chattering, afraid to be quiet because he'll set it aside, which you will. Maybe not today. And maybe those friends and family members that you have that have chosen to deny all of this in this lifetime, their choice, they'll have the same decision. And one day they'll make the same decision that you did to listen to the call. Doesn't have to be in this lifetime, right? We have a choice right now in the present moment. And we can spend this time however we choose. The ego always speaks first, and that is why it's so important to develop what we call patience on the spiritual path, to sit in calm and quiet, to develop what we refer to sometimes as mindfulness. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, it means this. It means letting the ego's chatter just go. It always speaks first. If you ask a question, it interrupts and attempts to, just like that, anxious, nervous, deeply afraid. Oh, yeah, deeply, deeply fearful. It wants to get the first word in, but the Holy Spirit always waits. So we practice waiting. We practice letting this constant stream of mind chatter, what's known in a lot of Eastern traditions as monkey mind, very apt description, isn't it? All of these random thoughts about yesterday's lunch and what we're having for dinner, and somebody that brought a tuna fish sandwich to work and how it smelled up the break room, and all of these random things in our social media feed and politics. And God, I'd like to go to Italy right now. And all of these random thoughts in what seems like a constant stream, we cultivate letting that go so we can hear the voice for God, who never interrupts, never shouts out first, never makes noise, but always speaks truly. And we develop in our practice some patience, some calmness, letting all of this chatter go so that we may hear the voice for God, even if it's just for a split second. That's enough to start a whole process rolling. Oh, yeah, isn't it? You know, you've started it. You absolutely know this. This is why meditation is a thing, so that we may calm our mind, calm the ego mind, which always speaks first. Let all of that chatter go and make way for the voice for God. That's why it's a thing. That's why in A Course in Miracles, it's a thing in the sense that if you're going through the workbook for students, you're invited to do the practice periods, which are meditations. That's what they are. You can call it whatever you want to call it. This is what we're all about here, is letting that chatter go, that psychobabble go, so that we may listen to our real self, capital S, so that we may listen to our inner teacher, the voice for God, who always, always speaks truly. So the ego has made a giant mistake. Its primary error, upon which its entire thought system resides, is it thinks it's separate from you. The ego regards itself as outside of you, a separate thing, a separate being. That's its primary error. In fact, that's the only error. It's the error, separation. The Holy Spirit is the answer. The ego is based on a mistake. We're not separate. And its entire thought system, individuality, separation, projection, guilt, blame, and fear, is based on a mistake. It's 100% incorrect and wrong. And here we are siding with it seemingly at every turn, lashing out, blaming, projecting our own fear and our own guilt on to anything and anyone that happens to cross our minds. And it passes for life here in the world. Sad, right? I mean, it is when you think about it. And happily, it is something we can choose to set aside. And that's what this is all about, is making that choice right now in the present moment to set the ego aside, to hear only the voice for God. Just that. So the ego speaks for this part of our mind that's torn, it's split, in other words, that thinks it's separate. But because the ego thinks it's separate, all it sees is separation. Because of this, the ego asked the very first question, what are you? And you could say, who are you? The ego asked this question and has not answered it. And Jesus goes on to tell us, though it has asked a great many questions since, and it hasn't answered a single one of them. Why? It's not the answer. The ego is not the answer. And the ego is aware that there is a part of your mind that is, well, true, that speaks truly. The ego doesn't know what the Holy Spirit is, and they don't speak to one another. They don't communicate with each other. But the ego is somehow aware of this other part of your mind. And the Holy Spirit, by the way, is not an outside thing. Your inner teacher, inner. I can't stress that enough. There are no separate beings. There's no separation of any kind. The Holy Spirit is within your mind, and it is the part of your mind that speaks truly, that speaks for God, of God, that reminds you who you are. And it waits patiently for the ego's little diatribe to be over with, and for you to chill out for a few seconds, minutes, days, weeks, months, years, decades, so that it may speak to you. Again, this is why meditation and mindfulness practices are a thing in world spirituality, in many traditions. The ego asks the question, what are you? Who are you? It doesn't have the answer, and it's afraid of you. The ego is actually afraid of you because it senses that there's this other part of your mind that you're ready to identify with and leave it aside. The ego is correct in that you will leave it aside. When, I don't know, there's people on the couch hiding, right? Maybe you know them, maybe you don't, that think we're all a complete bunch of lunatics for all of this woo-woo stuff, as people put it. How funny is that, right? Spirituality and all that. Well, what else is there? I ask you, really, truly. So let them have their thoughts and illusions, right? They will wake up. There is no separation of any kind. And even though people hide themselves from the light, it doesn't mean that the light does not still exist. So the ego is afraid of you. You know who you are. Of course, the ego's afraid that you're going to set it aside. So let's do that. Let's prove the ego right in that one respect, that we will set it aside. And we don't have to bludgeon it either. As I've said before here on this series of videos, I don't go in much, and I invite you to consider or reconsider, if you've adhered to this in the past, this saying that's so common in the world: kick fear in the face. Let's think about what that actually means. Now, it is most definitely saying, don't give in to fear, which is a very valuable message. It's a great message. Don't give in to fear, or you're back spinning your wheels, right? But when you kick it in the face, you're still spinning your wheels. Why? Because you've made an opponent out of it. You've made something out of nothing. You've made it so, and boom, you've got an opponent that you must now, or so you believe, kick in the face. We do this all of the time. We make opponents where there are none. You have no opponent. There's only perfect oneness. Oneness. So there's no one to kick in the face. And when we kick the ego in the face, we make it real to us. This is true of anything in life. When we make an opponent out of it, we separate. You, me, us, them. We separate. We draw a dualistic separation, which is a mistake. It's simply a mistake. The ego is simply a mistake to be corrected. Atonement, here in A Course in Miracles, is the correction of the Holy Spirit, the correction of our inner teacher, which we're invited to accept for ourselves. The essence of accepting atonement for ourselves is the acknowledgement that the separation never occurred. Never. There's never been any separation of any kind. The Holy Spirit always speaks truly and answers as the answer, answers for all time, for eternity. Therefore, we have the answer right now. And of course, we have the answer right now. The answer is that sane part of our mind. So we have the answer to the question, who are you? What are you? Ideas leave not their source. You've never left God. You are an idea. I am an idea. We're ideas. We're known here in A Course in Miracles as the thought of God. Ideas, thoughts, leave not their source. Thoughts remain in the mind of the thinker. We're in the mind of God. We're one with God. Who are you? Yes. Now, that's not the ego that we're talking about. You're not the ego. The ego is not part of you. It's simply a mistake. We've chosen to identify with it, but we can disidentify with it. This is the essence of all of spirituality. Disidentification with the ego, setting it aside. So in this section of the text, we'll continue on in the coming days and talk more about this subject, but this serves as a backdrop for a very good and very real conversation, one that I hope inspires you to practice. This is my hope in turning on this camera and microphone and broadcasting this message to all of you, is that it may inspire you to practice. A Course in Miracles is a self-study curriculum. So along the way, we could use a little clarification, can't we? And we can use a little inspiration to practice. So my aim is to clarify some points that may trip us up here and to inspire you to practice, to extend love to your brother, to see your brother as who he truly is, so that you may know yourself as you truly are. Ooh, yeah. Remember, one with means one with. One. All right. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. The subscription button's right here. That's that red arrow over here. And if you haven't joined us, feel free to do that. We'd love to have you join us. Go ahead and subscribe here. We've got an international community of folks we have had some excellent dialogue and discussion here on YouTube as well. So if you have questions or you have comments, I really do invite those. It's a very important part of the path is inquiry. So if you've got questions, please feel welcome to ask them. And I will see you here again on the next video. Thanks so much for joining me.